We agreed with Lisa that she starts.
Okay, pretty soon, just a minute or two more. I still see people coming in, new names. Okay, it's now 9:05. As we begin, just before we start, I'm going to ask Sean Connor from the Berlin office of the International Peace Bureau to give us a few sort of housekeeping words of housekeeping advice, excuse me.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give us a real quick introduction to how we will use Zoom today throughout the webinar. So if you'll look here quickly at the screen that I'm sharing, you'll see this is how you use the raise the hand feature. So during the presentation itself, we will ask that everyone please keep yourself muted while you are not speaking. If a speaker is presenting, please make sure that you are muted. And when you have a question, here's how you can raise your hand within Zoom, so then we can see that you have a comment and we can get to your questions and comments. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button that says participants. You'll see it here with the red circle. If you click on that, a screen will come up either on the right-hand side or as a separate screen. If it's on the right-hand side, if you click on the three little dots in the right-hand corner, then a screen will come up where you have the option to raise your hand. Also, if it comes up in a separate window, same thing, you click on those little dots and then you'll see the raise hand feature or whatever it is in the language of your Zoom. Once you click that, we can see your hand is raised and then we can call on you. If you are unable to do so for some reason, then please leave a comment saying that you have a question or a comment within the chat. That feature can also be found at the bottom of the screen. You'll see the chat button right next to the participation button. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. Can I add for the old fogies like me who are not terribly good on the digital novelties of this system that you can also wave your hand like this and Sean will see you, I'm sure, and sort of take a note of the fact that you want to speak, that you're desperate to speak, but you don't know where to raise your hand on the Zoom. Well, good morning to everybody. Good morning for this first side event of the council meeting that was supposed to happen in Helsinki. I'm very sorry not to be in Helsinki, as we all are, I'm sure. Laura and Kaisu, we would have loved to have been there with you. But the Peace Union of Finland is a historically long-standing member of the International Peace Bureau. It celebrates its 100th birthday this year, which is fantastic. We're older than that at the IPB, but we were already adults, 20-something-year-old adults when you came along. But there has been a parallel development between the two organizations. I feel that the Peace Union of Finland is the national version of the IPB internationally. It was founded by different groups, I read, including in 1920, not just peace groups, but labor movement groups, Christian peace groups, and feminist groups. So there also seems to be teetotalers, which is sort of fallen out of fashion a little bit, at least in the Mediterranean region. I think it's fantastic that we share so many goals together. And I think it's fantastic also that here we should be celebrating your 100th anniversary with a seminar that has been called A Climate of Peace, which of course refers to one of the biggest catastrophical threats to the future of humanity that we all need to address together. I think in my part of the world, we tend to talk about this as the need for climate justice, especially. Of course, we need the science to tell us how we can mitigate global warming and all of that. But we've got to also understand that the risks of global warming and from climate changes are not threatening people all over the world in the same way. Indigenous communities in the global south are those that are threatened most. We already have climate change refugees all over the place. In Africa, we have situations in several countries, including Somalia, for example, where the peace building events and initiatives are threatened not so much by continued fighting, but by the fact that the global warming and the climate changes force people to move to other places and create new tensions and so on. So I'm sure we will hear all about this. Of course, for the IPB, the more specific aspect of tackling global warming and climate change is the role that the military plays in exacerbating the situation of climate changes, in destroying the environment. The carbon footprint of the militaries is something that needs to be inspected, and also the fact that it's not even taken into consideration in most government reports. But, well, most, I don't know about most, but certainly not in the United States, which has the biggest military footprint anywhere. I would just like we who've been involved in nuclear weapons and nuclear disarmament know that, in fact, what got everything moving in the humanitarian initiative was the study done on the limited nuclear weapons exchange between India and Pakistan, and the effects that it would have on the climate in a totally different continent, in sub-Saharan Africa. So we know that all of this is interconnected. There is a new buzzword, especially in America, called intersectional. Well, I think this is the links between peace and climate and the environment in general is the real intersectional movement or moment of research where our work is needed, and where we must also sit back and read and understand, as well as acting, which is, of course, our principal role as peace activists. Dave Webb, who is an IPB vice president, and I have decided that we're going to share this morning's session and our responsibilities. I am going to leave the floor to Dave, who is going to moderate the entire session and draw the conclusions at the end. I'm very much looking forward to hearing all our speakers today, and I will be here. The sun is shining outside in Florence, Italy. I hope the weather is as positive for everybody else as well. Dave?
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Yeah, the weather's not quite so good here, but it hardly ever is. Just a bit drizzly. Anyway, great to be here. I'm really sorry we're not actually in Finland, which would have been wonderful in Helsinki, but there you go. I think I would just like really to say a few words about our speaker, Dan Smith, who's going to talk about these two interlinked mega challenges of today's world, climate change and nuclear weapons. He is, as everybody I'm sure realizes or knows, the director of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, and has been so since 2015. And before that, he held a range of prestigious positions and appointments, including being General Secretary of CND, which we've just been chatting about earlier, from 1974 to 1975, I think, quite a while ago. And he was Director of Peace Research Institute Oslo from 1993 to 2001, Secretary General of International Alert between December 2003 and August 2015. And he was also nominated by the UK to be a member of the UN Peacebuilding Fund's advisory group in 2007 and became chairman of the group from 2010 through to 2011. In 2013, he was also appointed part-time professor of peace and conflict at the University of Manchester's Humanitarian and Conflict Response Institute. I'm sure there's a lot more also that isn't mentioned here, but it's wonderful to have such a prestigious speaker, I think, to address these really important questions that we have ahead of us. It looks like the American presidents will change next year, hopefully, and there may be a slight difference in the way that American foreign policy anyway is carried out, and its attitude towards, or the president's attitude towards climate change, which will be welcome, but I'm not sure how much that will make a difference, but it will make certainly a lot of difference, I think, give a lot of hope to a lot of people around the world. Anyway, maybe let's move on to our keynote address by Dan Smith. Dan, if you're ready.
Yes, thank you very much, Dave, and everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for this invitation. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. I do wish that we could be in Helsinki together, as everybody has said. Personally speaking, I'm coming to you from a small island off the west coast of Sweden, and the weather here is absolute rubbish. In fact, it reminds me of southeast England at this time of the year, but never mind. I'm with you to talk about these two, as I said, major, separate but interlinked, related issues of nuclear weapons and climate change. And one of the things which I want to get to at near the end of my remarks, for take about 20 minutes this morning, is the particular ways in which they're linked, and how we can look forward to going ahead on both. Let's start with the nuclear weapons picture. If you look at it historically, it's in one way quite encouraging. In the mid-1980s, the peak number of nuclear warheads worldwide, we think, was somewhere in the vicinity of 65,000 to 70,000 nuclear warheads. At the beginning of 2020, we estimate that there are 13,400 nuclear warheads worldwide. So that's a huge decrease. And if you're looking on the bright side, or you could say if you're looking for the bright side, of those 13,400, 3,720 are deployed weapons. The rest are in storage, and some of them are awaiting destruction. Some of them, for example, China doesn't have any of its nuclear warheads operationally deployed. They're all kept in stores and would be brought out if necessary. Whereas both the US and Russia have them on deployed weapon systems, bombers that take to the air, submarines that are in the sea, and of course on missiles in silos. So the numbers have come down considerably. Another issue that has been exercising, I think, everybody who thinks about nuclear weapons over the last 50 or so years is the proliferation of nuclear weapons, the risk that many more nuclear weapon states will emerge. When the Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed in 1968, came into force in 1970, there were 5 recognized nuclear weapon states who are also the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. That's the US, Soviet Union then, that's Russia now, UK, France, and China in the order of going nuclear. And there was one non-recognized state owning nuclear weapons, and that was Israel, which is not referred to formally as a nuclear weapon state in the treaty. At that time, I looked back in SIPRI yearbooks to the beginning of the 1970s to see what estimates were being made about how many new states might go nuclear within the decade. And the worry was that maybe 12 to 15 nuclear threshold states were there in the world at that time. In fact, since then, there have only been another 3. That's in order of going nuclear: India, Pakistan, and most recently, North Korea. So although it's not pleasant having 9 nuclear weapon states in the world, although it's not good having 3,720 deployed nuclear warheads out of a global total of 13,400, we both were in a worse place and feared that we would get to a worse place on both of those metrics, both the numbers of nuclear weapons and the number of nuclear warheads. Having said that, having looked for the bright side as hard as I possibly could for a grey Saturday morning, you know, let's also wake up and smell the coffee. Nuclear arms control that was achieved between the US and the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War, and then between the US and Russia during the 1990s, has all but collapsed. And the one remaining piece is the New START agreement, the agreement that restricts the number of strategic nuclear weapons, the long-range missiles and so on. I think everybody in this gathering, this virtual gathering, would be aware that that treaty expires in February of 2021. I guess this is one place where you would expect that a switch from a Trump to a Biden administration would lead to a cause for greater optimism. In order to agree an extension of the New START agreement, do you know what is required? There's a capacity for a 5-year extension written into the treaty that was signed in 2010 and came into effect in 2011 for a 10-year period with a 5-year extension. What it would take is a phone call between the leader of one country and the leader of another, and they say, shall we extend? Yeah, let's do that. Why not? And then a couple of formal pieces of paper and the thing is done. So there's no complexity about doing that. And a 5-year extension would buy time then for proper negotiations about the next generation of arms control. And I think that's probably where President Biden would go. But I'll come back to some of what that means in the end. But there's a whole other architecture that has fallen apart in the meantime. The Bush administration withdrew the USA from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. That's part of what triggered the crumbling of the rest of the architecture. The first Russia and then the US announced that they were not going to be respecting the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that was agreed in 1987. At the same time, more or less, Russia announced that it no longer abided by the Conventional Forces Treaty, the non-nuclear weapons in Europe. And of course, there have been awful breaches of the Chemical Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Warfare. So arms control is in a great deal more trouble than the story that is told by the numbers actually reveals. And non-proliferation is also in more difficulty than the story told by the numbers of nuclear weapon states reveal. Because at the heart of the non-proliferation treaty, as I guess everybody here is reasonably familiar with, Article 6 binds the parties to good faith negotiations to end the nuclear, to achieve nuclear disarmament. It doesn't bind them to achieve nuclear disarmament, it binds them to undertake good faith negotiations to achieve it. But there has been over the years a great deal of impatience among the non-nuclear weapon states, many of whom say that, well, we signed up on the basis that the nuclear haves would become nuclear have-nots, while we nuclear have-nots would remain that way. It's a two-sided bargain at the core of the treaty. And what many of them say is that the nuclear weapon states have not, who are the permanent 5, have not kept that bargain. They've not kept their side of it. Yes, nuclear numbers have come down, but they could be coming down further. And most of the nuclear reductions have been done by the USA and the USSR and its successor states, not just Russia, but also, for example, Kazakhstan and Ukraine and Belarus, all of whom had the right to keep nuclear weapons after the Soviet Union broke up, and all of whom decided they would not keep nuclear weapons. So they actually achieved nuclear disarmament themselves, those three states. So the US and Russia, the superpowers, or the nuclear superpowers, have been reducing their armed forces, nuclear armed forces, but the UK, France, and China, they've not been part of that game. So there's a huge amount of impatience about this. And that, of course, is part of what gave the political drive for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons to become a treaty that's in force with 50 states ratifying it. And that impatience and the incompatibility of views about Article 6 from the Nuclear Five and the rest has made successive review conferences of the Non-Proliferation Treaty into kind of, the diplomatic equivalent of chaos. It's not unusual for these 5-year review conferences to be unable to agree about what it was that they disagreed about. That no statement comes out at the end. That was the case in 2015, amongst others. And there should have been 2020. There should have been a non-proliferation treaty review conference during this year. It's been deferred from April, May of this year to initially to January, and now it's been formally postponed to August. The reason for that, of course, is not political difference over the treaty. They could get together anyway. The reason for it is the pandemic, COVID-19 crisis. But nonetheless, here's a set of big issues. There is to be an international gathering. What will come out of that? Many people have been fearing that the Non-Proliferation Treaty would collapse. Before I move away from the nuclear topic and onto the climate change topic, I just want to say, we really do need to remember what the scale of this issue is. A limited nuclear war, as that scenario about the India-Pakistan war, which Lisa Clark referred to earlier, a limited nuclear war would be absolutely an event without precedent. I mean, on a scale of horror that we have not experienced and probably find hard to imagine. And I guess we all know that we are here thanks to the fact that Colonel Petrov on the 28th of September 1983 refused to believe his computer screens. He was a colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Force. He was on duty. Computer told him that there was an incoming US missile attack, and twice that evening it told him so, and twice he refused to believe it and refused to pass the information along. And as a result, there was no nuclear retaliation by the Soviet Union against what, as later became clear, was a non-event. There was no missile attack coming from the US. In the modern period, as nuclear weapons are being developed further and being modernized, and as artificial intelligence and big data management is coming into the picture, there will be less and less time for taking the decisions. And there are likely to be fewer humans like Colonel Petrov in the decision-making loop. And those are the risks that we face. So they really are serious risks. We need to be making more progress towards nuclear disarmament. It cannot be allowed to stand still. The risks are huge. You can say the same about climate change, about our other topic this morning. And there are so many different ways to look at what the issues involved in climate change are, even if you look at them from a particularly peace and conflict and security angle. Lisa mentioned Somalia earlier on. Over the past 60 years in Somalia, there has been a steady increase in average temperatures as part of global warming. Over the past 30 years, there has every year been either a major drought or a major flood, traceable, both of those, to the climate change. And in the last 15 or so years, each one of those extreme events, the drought or the flood, both produces a number of people who then are leaving the land and leaving their farms. But it also generates greater credibility for Al-Shabaab, who tend to be able to respond quicker to people's needs as in the wake of the natural disaster or the weather event than the federal government does. So the inability to deal with the consequences of climate change in Somalia is feeding both short-term instability and long-term conflict. Think about the rise of sea levels. A lot of attention when we think about increasing sea levels goes towards the small island states, and especially to those who face the existential problems, some of the Pacific Island states. There's maybe 8 to 10 Pacific Island states that face the possibility of being submerged and non-viable within a 20 to 40-year period. The combined population at the moment is about 2.3 million people, and this is a serious issue to be addressed and dealt with within the Pacific region, because those people and their children, and their yet to be born children, will have to move somewhere. But on low-lying coastal plains within less than 5 meters above sea level, the total population of people is estimated to be between 800 million and 1 billion people. There are 570 cities on those low-lying coastal plains, and over 20 of them have populations of above 10 million people each. Now, if those areas start to be inundated, then one could expect serious problems to ensue, especially in some of those areas where one would not expect that the governments are really capable of responding to the issues both efficiently and with care and with kindness. And the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has warned that what used to be regarded as once in a lifetime surges in sea level will be happening on the basis, on a frequency of about once a year. And the problem is not just the level to which the sea rises on average, it is surges in sea level that come in and inundate low-lying areas and cities. Those pressures in places where governments cannot handle the pressures can be expected to generate social instability, political instability, disputes over conflict, disputes over resources, and where those disputes can't be managed, there can be escalation towards violence and even in some cases towards open armed conflict. And the issue with climate change is that it is for the next several decades, however well the world responds to the challenge of greening the economy, the pressure of climate change will be permanent. It will just keep coming. Consequences of climate change are backed up into the natural, for want of a better word, backed up into the system. These changes are going to happen. Sea level is going to rise, temperature is going to increase, rainfall will be affected. The monsoons have already been affected and will be affected further. What happens is partly that they change their timing and partly they become shorter. So for example, in Nepal, an average of 40 or so days of rain falls nowadays in an average of 20 or so days. So it's much more intense, it's much harder to handle given the infrastructure which is available. And this plays out in other places. The typhoons that hit the Philippines have changed their location. So they're starting to hit areas where people are not historically used to typhoons, and houses are not built in typhoon resistant ways, and so on. And part of what the COVID-19 crisis, the pandemic, has shown us is a somewhat worryingly low degree of resilience amongst many societies. And of course, in these circumstances, it is true that some poorer societies, economically poorer, have shown greater resilience than some of the economically richer societies. But don't let that become a romantic view about how the local and in the villages and before westernization has hit, people are always better able to handle it. Because in general, what has been a serious burden for the rich countries is a heavier burden for most poor countries and is a crushing burden for war-affected and conflict-torn countries. And there is a link between COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. Climate change is a part of a compound environmental crisis which we're facing. Climate change is one of the most serious drivers of it, but the loss of biodiversity is extraordinary at the moment. The 6th mass extinction is happening. the world is losing species faster than it ever has done before. There's a major crisis of air pollution, which is directly connected to climate change because warmer air holds the pollutant particles for longer. And the way in which land use has changed, which is part of the human economic development, which itself has generated climate change, the way in which land use has changed is one of the reasons for zoonotic diseases, the diseases which jump from animals to humans because of closer contact between them. And of course, amongst other diseases of our time that are zoonotic, one is COVID-19. Now, I want to suggest two ways in which all these issues link together. One is that there's been a discussion going on for this century, basically, most of this century. It started amongst geologists. The idea that the current epoch should be, or the current period should be renamed as being part of the Anthropocene epoch, which means that in the Anthropocene epoch, the driving force of change, what influences the natural environment most, is human activity. That's the anthro in Anthropocene. There's general agreement that this is there's increasing agreement, let me say, rather than general agreement, that this is a term which is useful and it works and it explains a lot and it helps throw a spotlight on a number of the problems that we face. But how do you date it? What's the beginning of the Anthropocene epoch? Right? And there's two big suggestions. One is the beginning of the industrial age. That would put it at about 1800, 1810, 1820, somewhere there, when the world population first reached the level of 1 billion people, by the way. And the second suggestion is that it should be at the beginning of the nuclear age, from when you get human-made radioactivity appearing in the natural environment. So from that point of view, this set of environmental questions and the nuclear challenge that we're facing, summed up by the concept of the Anthropocene epoch, are telling us that we are shaping our environment and we are shaping our chances of survival, of life, of prosperity, in a way that we never quite have before. We need to re-understand and reimagine ourselves as being part of nature, not as there being people and nature, but we're all part of the whole. And within that, we cannot afford, in the short, medium, or long term, to be taking the kind of risks with ourselves and with each other that are bound up in, for example, the nuclear weapons age, for example, in the way in which we have an economic system, which, while from an economic point of view is the most successful in history, is from another point of view steadily eating us alive. Now, what is the way to deal with this? I feel that I'm in danger of producing what have become for me cliches. Let me call them, instead of cliches, mantras, right? But this is something which, when I think about climate change or cyber vulnerability or pandemics, or indeed the nuclear age, nuclear weapon threat, this is what comes to me all the time. We need to understand the problems and we need to cooperate about them. There is not a single major problem worldwide today that can be solved by any one state acting alone, or even any one community acting alone. A lot of the action, for example, to ride out the impact of climate change, must be driven and decided in local villages, by communities all around the world. That's where the action really lies. But if it is not supported from provincial government, national government, and international organization, if it is not resourced where it needs to be resourced, then all the best activity in the world will not be enough. So we need to have international cooperation. The trouble that we face, the problem that we face at the moment, is that we have an ever deepening need, an unprecedentedly deep need for cooperation on a broad range of issues, and a declining appetite for it. This is why people like me have suddenly become experts on what is happening to the blue counties in Pennsylvania, and what the breakdown of incoming votes is from, and how the provisional votes will break down in Nevada and Arizona. It's because if at least one of the three great powers of our time returns to a leadership mode which has more commitment to cooperation, we stand a better chance of addressing these issues. Now, having said that, let me put in a couple of additional points there. Yes, I hope for a win by Joe Biden, but Biden is not the whole solution. The breakdown of nuclear arms control happened first of all under George Bush, and it accelerated while Obama was the president. So a better president than Trump, well, a worse president than Trump is hard to imagine. A better president than Trump is certainly welcome, but a better president than Trump is not the whole solution to the issue. First of all, there needs to be corresponding action elsewhere, but secondly, there needs to be permanent political pressure. There needs to be a push. There needs to be activity from the movement level. The ordinary people we need ordinary people to be responding to these extraordinary pressures, as people have in the past, as people are now over various issues, and pushing not just for solutions to this problem and that problem, but pushing for that cooperation. And just as there isn't a magic bullet to fix the problem of nuclear weapons confrontation, so there's no magic solution to it, no magic key. Similarly, there isn't to climate change either. Yes, we need to mitigate carbon emissions. We have a huge challenge. I mean, greening the economy, decarbonizing advanced economies on targets that have been set and agreed, for example, by the EU, mean putting carbon emissions over the next, going in reverse speed on carbon emissions over the next 30 years, or going in reverse gear over the next 30 years to cover the same distance that it took 200 years to build up. Right? I'm not sure if I've said that at all clearly, but we've had 200 years of rapidly increasing carbon emissions, and we need to put that process into reverse and faster over the next 3 years, while looking after the needs, including the needs for prosperity and goods and food of a still growing world population. It is a huge challenge, and it's important not just to make a brown to green transition in the world economy. It's also important to make sure that that is a just transition, that it is one that is socially fair. It's actually quite easy to draw up models for how you could make a transition from a brown economy to a green. But some of those models are so top down, they're actually authoritarian in many ways. They would exclude and marginalize many members of population. So we have big problems. You've asked me to speak about two of them, nuclear weapons and climate change. And we have really one word, one set of values is the solution. The set of values is to do with justice and fairness as the basis for peace. And the one word is that we have to cooperate. We have to get together. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope, no, the weather is still rubbish, but I hope that I've helped you understand things a little bit more clearly, maybe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was excellent kind of way of bringing all these very important issues together. Are there people clapping? Sorry, should allow some time for that. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. There's so many things to think about there that you've given us, I think. It also seems to me that there's this necessity for a different power structure that needs to develop, because at the moment there is lip service paid to all of these things that you've mentioned, climate change, nuclear weapons, etc., but there is no attempt to engage ordinary people, as you say, who are going to be needed to put all of these things into this change that we need into action, really. It's still held, the power is still held with the minority of people who don't want to relinquish that power, and they see any kind of attempts to do so to force them into relinquishing it as being a challenge and not wishing to engage with those alternative ideas. But I think, I'm not sure what's happening now. I think we've got some comments from Philip and Rainer, and also a bit later on, but have we got time for questions? Do we have a question and answer session? No comment from anyone. Okay. I don't know if anybody wants to add any questions. If you would like to put some questions in the chat.
Dave, I think the question time comes after the interventions.
Oh yeah, sorry, I've missed that part of the agenda. I'm terribly sorry. Okay, let's go on. Let's move on then to comments by Philip and Rainer to start with from IPB, and by Friday for the Future, or Kaisu Kinnunen Committee of 100, the chair of that group. So Philip, are you going to start, or Rainer?
I think so. I'm not sure.
You start, Philip.
Okay, thank you, Dave. And thank you, Dan. I would just like to say I'm speaking to you from just outside Geneva, and the fog is beginning to lift, and is lifting during your presentation. So you've worked some magic down here. I'd like to thank Dan for his comments and for setting the context for this weekend for the IPB. But before I go into the guts of Dan's speech and his ideas and suggestions, I'd first of all like to express my congratulations to Rauhanliitto. I hope I've said that correctly, on their centenary. As Lisa said, the Rauhanliitto have made a very important contribution to Finnish society, to the Nordic countries, and also to the world, a very powerful message to the world. And last year in London, one of your stalwarts, quite a character as I seem to recall, Mr. Ilkka Taipale, I hope I've said that correct, gave me a book, and it's called 100 Innovations from Finland, and not innovations in a digital sense, but innovations which are social in nature. And in this book, he refers to the contribution that Finland has made to peace. And he talks in particular, there's a chapter dedicated to the legacy of Martti Ahtisaari on peace meditation. And the creation of the CMI. And there's a comment here which I think is useful to set the context for what follows. And he writes, this is Ilkka writes, we help all the sides involved in a conflict to build more just societies. What this means in practice is a distribution of political and economic power, but also real improvements in the lives of ordinary people in all the areas affected by the conflict. And I would say that many of the conflicts and tensions that we see in our societies today is because we are not seeing real improvements in the lives of ordinary people. The final line in this chapter is a quote from Martti Ahtisaari at a time of a great moment of tension for him in Namibia. And he said, many times in Namibia too, I was tempted to throw in the towel. And I think the message on your centenary is that Rauhanliitto was not thrown in the towel, and that also that the IPB, which is soon entering its 130th year, is not prepared or ready to throw in the towel. And I think these are very important considerations at this time of crisis, at this time of urgency. I was thinking of birthday gifts for the Centenary organization, and I was thinking, well, you've given so much to the world. What has the world given back to you? And I'd like to think that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons could be considered as a symbolic gift to the people of Finland. I would like to consider perhaps the gift from the people of the United States of America would be to deliver a new president, and that perhaps that will lead to more meaningful, productive, demilitarized, détente kind of discussions with your next door neighbors, Russia. And I also hope with the science of this world and the combined efforts of this world and the cooperation that Dan Smith says that we need so urgently would be a vaccine for COVID-19. But we know to deal with the crisis that we face, we need more. Dan, I'd like to thank you for your contribution, for this very sober analysis, and also your sense of what the pathways to resolution is. On behalf of the IPB, I'd like to thank you as the Chief of SIPRI for the cooperation with us. The research that SIPRI conducts is of enormous value to the peace movement everywhere. I'd like to say that we leverage the information that you provide, and each year we have a campaign against the escalating levels of military expenditure. And we drew attention to the world of the comparison of what the world spends on its military and what the world is spending on its healthcare at a time where we simply didn't have the medical equipment and supplies available to meet the needs of hospitals in distress and peoples in distress. We had a slogan which resonated everywhere: healthcare, not warfare. We made a very strong point that the world was fighting the wrong war. And this had a resonance throughout the IPB family, which is increasingly global. I do receive your regular email feeds. And one of the ones that struck my attention most recently was an article on authoritarianism and the linkage between authoritarianism and rising military expenditure, where the example of Brazil was used to what I thought was to great effect. So thank you for your work and thank you for the cooperation. It is really appreciated. I've just been co-president for 1 year. All my background has been in the labor movement. I used to be known as a global warrior, was in the labor movement, and they're still scratching their heads as to how now I'm a man of peace, because most of the time I was declaring aggression against the neoliberal community and multinational companies. I'd only been in the job 2 months, and the doomsday clock ticked to 100 seconds to midnight. And I received many calls from my friends and old colleagues saying, "What the hell are you doing, Jennings? The world is getting worse and not better." Shortly afterwards, the UN Secretary General talked about the 4 horsemen and the climate, not just climate change, but the lack of trust, the digital revolution, and the rise of authoritarianism, and this economic inequality that we see was heading the world into an apocalyptic situation. And all of this these observations were made, the doomsday clock was announced all before COVID-19. So it was hardly a charmed beginning for me in my time at the IPB, but all of these events have been a very powerful concentration of the mind. And I'd like to try to make the linkages that you've made, that all of these things that we are seeing are threats to peace. But I'm not sure that the public response is being seen in the sense that these are threats to peace. It is also a huge challenge to the peace movement in terms of how do we react? And do we have the power and the imagination and the creativity to light that spark amongst people? You talked about people and their movements, but also to project an alternative vision for this world. And there I see an opportunity for a great deal of hope. Your remarks bring us this broader dimension of this linkage between climate change and peace. I know from my time in the labor side, the G7 also began a conversation about this very subject, a new climate for peace, 5 years ago. And we don't seem to have seen much action since. But with the work that you have referred and the human drama involved of 1 billion people being displaced, of 2 billion people facing food shortages, of when we look at climate incidents during the last 20 years, they've impacted the lives of 6.9 billion people. And I think it's important, Dan, in the work that you do, and I think you have your own commission now at SIPRI looking at this, is that can we make a stronger case for peace in the midst of this ecological calamity? Now, looking to those other urgent threats, and something which I'm familiar with from the labor movement, the International Labour Organization celebrated its centenary last year. Now, the ILO was born from war. It was a part of the Versailles Treaty that actually worked. If you look at paragraph 427 of the Versailles Treaty, you have the world's first social contract. And the message was, without social justice, there can be no peace. And I think this idea is also being lost in today's environment. Moving forward to 1944, again, during the Second World War, we had the Declaration of Philadelphia, which was about the values and the purpose of the International Labour Organization. And they said that labor is not a commodity, that poverty anywhere is a threat to prosperity everywhere, and that there will be no peace without social justice. And therefore, I'd also like to think in the work of your own commission, when you're looking at climate and security, where can we, or is it possible to bring in this social dimension in the terms of the threats to social justice and fairness as a threat to peace? With COVID-19, it's just added to the fault lines that we witness. Our democracies have suffered, according to Freedom House, 14 years of decline. 80 countries have somehow diminished the quality of their democratic life as a result and reaction to COVID-19. When it comes to union rights, the people like myself and those ordinary members around the world, we've had 7 years of serial decline. In over 60 countries, our work has found and concluded of the threats to our lives and the threats that we face just to do our job. In 8 out of 10 countries surveyed, the rights to organize and the rights to negotiate. Now, this is part of the response. These are enabling rights. If we can organize and we can negotiate and take a stand, we can shift the dial when it comes to peace and to social justice. During COVID-19, inequality is growing from an already catastrophic situation. The share of wages in the wealth produced is shrinking and continues to shrink. COVID-19, poverty. We have 800 million people in this world's workforce of ours surviving on less than $3 a day. And there's COVID-19, we know has accentuated these differences. The equivalent of 500 million jobs have been lost since March. We have 2 billion people in what is called the informal labor market, the majority of whom have had their source of income lost. Overall, in our economies, we've lost 10% in income, and the world economy will shrink by 5% this year. Social protection, 4 billion people on this planet, almost half of them have no social protection whatsoever. And therefore, I'm adding all of this as a message, on the one hand, that our peace movement needs to be in closer connection and joint campaigning mode with the ecological movement, and at the same time, the peace movement. And I'm glad to see this, and I'm working hard at this, that the labor movement and the peace movement have to unite their forces where they can in pursuit of this sense of an alternative. Last year, I was a member of this a global commission on the future of work. It was chaired by the Prime Minister of Sweden, Stefan Löfven, and Cyril Ramaphosa. And we cut through a lot of the digital hyperbole and digital hype out there. And we said that the world needs a new social contract, that the world was sleepwalking to disaster. And we talked about a human-centered approach. And what we're trying to do, and it's been adopted by the UN system, but it may not be seen visible yet, is how can we shift our economic thinking and shift our approach to social justice, and to have and to shift from this neoliberal era into a more human-centered era of thinking in terms of people, in terms of our institutions, and in terms of our sustainability. And I think for the commission that you have at SIPRI, this would be something that would be important to consider. Your remarks were helpful in setting the context, but also there's another dimension about behind Dave, you have Build Back Better. Now, I think he got that up there before Joe Biden put that up on his slogan and on his podiums. We know it has its roots in the UN system. So we are very animated in the IPB and in the labor movement about what Build Back Better looks like, and also in terms of whether we can make that Build Back Better piece human-centered and to regenerate interest in a social contract. I know we lost John Lewis, the great congressman, this year. I think he'd be pleased to see what's going on in Georgia at the moment. And he said we have to make good trouble for peace. I can assure you, Dan, it's our intention to make good trouble for peace. And we are at the IPB. There's a great deal of energy. We're more global. We have lots of initiatives taking place. And we had this big Congress next year, Barcelona 2021. And I think it is I remember your comments from the SIPRI Peace Conference in the spring about the new realism has to be cooperation. And what our thinking is that the theme of this conference is stronger together. And the aim is that we'll try in this time where you talked about this need to cooperate governmentally, but there needs to be this much broader coalition, I think, of all that civil society movement, which is dedicated to peace. Another initiative which I wanted to mention at this juncture is the theme of common security, which I think Rainer will also talk about. 2022 is the 40th anniversary of Olaf Palmer's report and on common security. And at the IPB, we're very interested in what does common security mean as part of Build Back Better. And I know that the report was written at the height of the Cold War, at a time when nuclear tensions were high. A different era may be, but we still have those tensions today. And we've had chats with the Olaf Palmer Institute, and we are thinking of what can we do in the build-up to 2022 to have another fresh look at what common security means, and how do we go about achieving it? And I'm sure there'll be interest from SIPRI as well. I look forward to your responses to us in terms of what does a peace dimension to Build Back Better look like? To what extent does the social contract idea figure in your own commission's work? And you've already referred to this, but also the Build Back Better. How does a Biden presidency look like? Finally, my message to Rauhanliitto, I found a quote from Bertha van Suttner, the first woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1905. And she was there at the beginning of the life of the IPB. And there's a quote which we're very fond of at the IPB, which says, "As long as our hearts beat for peace, we must win over the hearts of all people for peace." I think that is the centenary message to Rauhanliitto. It's a centenary message from the IPB to our Finnish friends and the peace movement, that we will continue our work to win over the hearts of all people for peace. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thanks once again, Dan, for being available to us as the sun begins to burst through over Lake Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you. I probably should say that I did have the Build Back Better before it was hijacked by other people, including Boris Johnson, unfortunately, in the UK. Maybe it should be Build Back Better and Build Back Different as well.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
That's good.
So thank you very much for those comments, wonderful comments. And Rainer, it's over to you now.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you all. You know, I will not repeat the wishes and the congratulations to our Finnish friends and colleagues. I have the big honor to speak in the afternoon, so I think it's a great pleasure to be with you at your 100 years anniversary. I want to speak about the carbon footprint of military. And when I'm looking to the 6 largest CO2 emitters, which are representing 60% of all emissions, we have the countries mentioned, which are the biggest protagonists in the geopolitical rivalries, like China with 30%, US with quite 40%, India, Russia, Japanese, and Germany. And when I'm looking to the European Union, it is on place number 3 of the highest emission producers. So these countries are the countries which are fighting intensively for a new world order. And how we can see, this fight is absolutely not peaceful. It's a fight of arms race and confrontation. And when you are looking to these 6 countries, you will see that these 6 countries are also the countries which have the highest military expenditure. They are spending the majority of the $2 trillion which we are spending every year for the military purposes. And they are the highest country, highest producer of arms exports and weapons productions. So this is the 2 sides of one coin: military spending and emission producers. And I think that is not enough when you are looking to climate change. The second point, I think we should never forget that wars themselves produce enormous amount of fuel and energy and correspondingly produce many climate damaging emissions. You know, we have not forget how the environment looks like when we are looking to Verdun. And we have not forgotten how the environment looks like when we are looking to big parts of Vietnam. Wars, military actions destroy tremendously the environment. And I think we have to repeat this day to day. And even in so-called peace times, military destroys the environment. When you are looking to the military bases, and we have more than 1,000 in the world, these military bases are destroying groundwater, they are producing noises, they are producing a lot of pollution, and we have to kill a lot of trees and surroundings for these military air bases. From the German perspective, I can only say, have a look to the airbase Ramstein, then you can see how environment will be destroyed by the military. And never forget, 1 hour flight of F-15, F-35 produced the same amount of emissions than 150,000 cars their whole life they are living and driving. That is the same amount of emissions. And never forget, you know, when you're looking to the emission producer by military, then the Pentagon would be a state. It would be on the place number 47 of the largest emitters of greenhouse gas in the world, in front of Sweden, in front of Spain and other European countries. Climate change, I think, is today always a part of all conflicts and wars. When you are looking to Darfur, many people are saying this was the first climate war between the farmers and the cattle rangers. When you are looking to the wars in Africa, in Central Africa, when you are looking to the wars in Syria, Libya, Yemen, all these wars and conflicts have an environmental relations, and environmental is a very important part of these conflicts and wars. It destroys the agriculture, it has consequences by all the climate change. And I think the report of the IPCC from 2017 and 2019, and the Transatlantic Academy report from 2019, which describes the strong relations between climate change and wars, is even a start point for a deeper discussion and more actions in these relations. I think we have a huge problem for the future to bring these relations broader to the public. The last point I would mention for the consequences of climate change and wars are the migrations of millions of people, which has to leave their country because of wars on one side and conflicts, and of climate change on the other side. This brings me to the consequences, and I think I can summarize the consequences in one word. We need international climate justice in peace. I think this is the visions also for IPB and the peace movement, that we have to bring together environmental questions, social questions under the point of climate justice. And this is impossible without peace and without overcoming the structures of war. So my final sentence must be: the catastrophic climate change and nuclear war are unique in many terms, and they are essential threats for the survival of human civilization, and we have to fight against this. And this is the tremendous role the international peace movement has, and IPB too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rainer, for including those very important comments. I think I've just managed to get a copy of the agenda now, you'll be pleased to know, and I see we're supposed to be finishing this at 11:15, but I think we're going to have to carry on a little bit longer. This is such an important discussion, and it's getting some excellent comments and some excellent participation. So let's carry on, and the next speaker is Kaisu Kinnunen, who's from the Committee of 100, the chair of Committee of 100 in Finland. I was going to say here in Finland, but unfortunately we're not here in Finland. I think that's an organization which is an anti-militarist, politically and religiously non-aligned peace organization founded in 1963. And it's kind of a coincidence that the 100, the Committee of 100, it doesn't mean 100 years of peace movement in Helsinki, but it does mean, I'm not sure exactly what it means. Perhaps Kaisu will explain. We did have a Committee of 100 in the UK at one time, which caused a bit of a split with CND, but that's all been healed now. Anyway, okay, Kaisu, over to you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Dave. And to comment on the Committee of 100, it indeed comes from the UK Committee of the 100. We just took the name from there. I want to thank you, Dan, Philip, and Rainer, for the great comments and contributions. I'm actually joining in from sunny central Finland. It's good to see you all. As we have heard today, we live in a world where new types of global security trends, such as climate change, pandemics, and cybersecurity, have become a focus of security policy. And these are all issues that cannot be answered with power politics or weapons, of which there is a good consensus here, I assume. I was asked to talk about today's peace work, and it got me thinking that in many areas we are still talking about the very same issues we did decades ago, such as nuclear disarmament. And this is for a good reason, no doubt. But maybe it just tells us that achieving peace takes time, and it needs to be constantly maintained and built. But as I see it, in addition to the traditional disarmament work, peace work has become more diverse. And referring to what Philip said about social dimension of peace work, I see that defending social justice, highlighting growing inequality, and tackling hate speech and racism, to say the few, are seen as a key issues for peace work nowadays. And in such understanding, a sustainable social and economic development are the best guarantees for maintaining peace. And I agree with Philip that without social justice, there can't be peace. Because in a peaceful society, everybody's basic needs and well-being are taken well into account, and equal opportunities and fair distribution of resources, be it education, healthcare, or income, are essential if we want to achieve peace. And additionally, oftentimes perceptions of security emerge from people's everyday lives. For example, young people are increasingly worried about their own future prospects, their own opportunities to influence. And we can see how this unpredictability and increasing inequality may result in social exclusion and fragmentation of values. Today, it is perhaps more widely understood and acknowledged that power politics are not the answer to modern security challenges. Power politics cannot bring lasting benefits anywhere. Peace is visible to all of us, it affects all of us, and the lack of it affects all of us. And for me, it seems, or I hope, that today it's increasingly clear for people that these issues such as climate change, pandemics, cybersecurity, injustices, they will affect all of us. And perhaps what I want to say is that peace work is diverse. Peace can and should be promoted in many ways and on many levels, and that it takes time and effort to achieve sustainable peace. And I am extremely grateful that this world is also built by people who promote peace and work to change perceptions of traditional security or power politics. And I, of course, mean all of you here also. As for the answers on how to respond to the threat of nuclear war or climate change, I don't have better answers than given today, such as global cooperation, international treaties, jointly agreed actions. And I agree that everyone's efforts are needed. Building a more sustainable world can start, for example, with a change in attitudes, which would make people all over the world look at the world in a bit different or a new way, not through the lenses of traditional power politics. And climate change, I think, has given a rise to a new kind of movement, talking about Fridays for Future. And we see people, especially youth, participating in action. And we as the peace movement can be creating and encouraging this change, a climate for peace, may I say, that focuses on hope and not on threats or confrontation, that works to secure everyone's basic needs, after which we can set out to pursue something even greater, like world peace. And of course, we need to give a voice to everyone whose future is affected by our decisions, because involving everyone and increasing understanding also builds the foundation for the societal and political change we need to respond to these global megatrends. I think I'm not going to take more of your time on this matter. This is my take on the issue, and I just want to say I'm very happy to be here celebrating Peace Union, sharing these views, and also hearing your takes on the issue at hand. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Actually interesting from what you were saying and what has been said already, because in the UK, the Committee for 100 had a particular response to the nuclear question, and that was mass civil disobedience. And you mentioned some of the kind of the grassroots organizations that are reacting to climate change in a similar way. And I wondered if people thought what was the validity of that kind of action now? Is that something we desperately need, or is it something we should avoid? But I think we've got a little bit of time. We've run out of time really according to the agenda, but let's go on for a little bit more with any questions and answers. Does anybody have any questions? If you can raise your hand in the manner shown by Sean earlier on, please do. Otherwise, I wonder if anybody could address that particular question about the struggle for power and whether mass civil disobedience, whether is that the kind of thing that we need to go, or is it a direction that we need to go, or are there other directions? Kaisu, would you like to say anything on that, perhaps?
Yes, I can say something. Sorry, I'm struggling with 2 screens here. On my view, disobedience is needed at some level. You asked if mass disobedience is needed to make the change happen. I think yes, but it needs to start from the understanding. It needs to have a base on empathy, and the disobedience needs to be also done by peaceful means, which means non-violence. And I think that's my very short take on the issue. But I would say that there is a place for mass disobedience, because we are talking about issues, major issues that affect all of us.
Yep, thank you. I don't see any hands being raised at the moment. So should we carry on?
A coffee break.
Yeah, I think maybe we should have a break now. So I think it's 20, I make it 20 past 9, 20 past 11 in Finnish time. So we come back at...
Ingeborg has a question for
Oh,
Dan.
sorry. Okay, Ingeborg.
Yes, thank you for all these inspiring presentations. And also, Dan, I liked very much your overview of the situation. And I was only struggling a little to understand, did you say that you thought we need a major country to guide us and police the world situation? If so, kindly explain, because I thought we had the UN to help us in that sense. Thank you.
Yes, and hi Ingeborg, nice to see you again, even virtually. It's been a long time. No, first of all, I didn't say that, but let me sort of touch that issue, just put it into a little bit of perspective. I think that the reason, one of the reasons why there has been so much discomfort caused by the presidency of Donald Trump to so many different kinds of people with different kinds of views is to do with the change in the American role in the world that presaged, or that brought in. Now, I think that people on the very sort of, let's say, progressive end of politics with very radical critique of US power, who were not especially enamored even of Obama, let alone of, certainly not George Bush, but nor Clinton, and the cruise missiles being used, almost drones coming in, almost random use, it seemed at times, in the Middle East. Such people have been very discomforted by Trump in world power. Those with a much more conservative worldview, the Carl Bildts, the kind of the just right of center European politicians, have also been discomforted by Trump. The only people who seem to have been celebrating Trump have been well to the right on the political spectrum. The Progress Party in Norway, Nigel Farage in the UK, Marine Le Pen, Sweden Democrats, and so on, that ilk. Now, why is it that such a big swathe of opinion has been in different ways discomforted by Trump? It is because, to a greater degree than we had realized or had been wanting to acknowledge, we do actually need great powers to act with a certain degree of responsibility. And when they don't, And when they actively set out to undermine the international system, then we start to be in a really rather uncomfortable situation, because yes, we have the UN, Ingeborg, but in the field of security, who decides what the UN is going to do? It's the Security Council. And there, the veto of one of the major powers can, stop action happening. Now, this year, in a way, it was a token, but I think it was an important token as a gesture. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, called for a COVID ceasefire, called upon parties engaged in armed conflict in all countries around the world to acknowledge that here was a bigger enemy. Stop fighting each other for a while we confront the greater problem. Okay? And the UN Security Council took months to be able to agree on this, because the US and China were arguing about something else. And they were arguing about the World Health Organization. And that just stymied the UN Security Council, that platform, the UN coming forward really seriously and saying, yes, what the Secretary General says, the organization as a whole backs, all the states of the world agree, there should be ceasefire. That ceasefire wouldn't have been implemented in every conflict around the world, but its chances of being implemented in some, and therefore of some good being done, would have been improved if the UN Security Council had made the call much earlier than it did. So I think that we have to recognize that actually we do want there to be responsible leadership at that global level. When all three of the major powers are rejecting the shape of the international system, are undermining international cooperation, when in addition you have other leading powers in Europe, in Latin America, even in Africa and South Asia, also challenging that cooperation and the shape of the international system, then for all the flaws in the current system, we get to a worse position. It's a little bit like saying, look, arms control has a number of serious issues, even if it's functioning properly. Why is it that it's the US and Russia who limit the numbers of their weapons by agreement? Why not China? If not China, why not bring the UK and France in? Why do they get a free ride? If talking about the 5 which are recognized under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, what is the odd diplomatic nicety, which means you can't talk about, in the context of nuclear arms control and disarmament, you can't talk about India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. Right? So there are a lot of things which are wrong with arms control and need to be fixed. But the best way of fixing arms control is not to start by throwing aside the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty and the Strategic Agreement on the Reduction of Nuclear Weapons, New START. You build up, not down. So that's the kind of thinking that I bring to this. I would rather that a flawed system worked than that a flawed system failed even worse than it had done before.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. I think we've had a really important and interesting session. I think there have been some fantastic contributions from all the speakers. Thank you very much for being here, for taking part in this this particular session. I think probably we should take a break now. I'm not sure whether you're staying with us, Dan, or whether you're going to leave us at this stage, but you'd be welcome to stay, of course.
I'm sorry, I was just leaning forward to type in the chat saying, thank you very much, everyone. I hope to meet you another time rather sooner than the gap between our last meeting, Dave, and this one. And I wish you all a very successful meeting. This is a very important gathering, and I'm glad to have been part of it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Great to see you. Thanks. So let's have a break now for 15 minutes and see you shortly. Again, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Is everyone there? Are we ready to restart? Or
I think
hello?
we are
Everyone
first
there?
online, so I think we can start.
Okay, thank you, Laura. So then, ready for the next session? Just get my agenda up here, sorry. So now we have the next session, which is on peace, health and development, and will include discussions on the early lessons of the COVID pandemic on the concept of health and development and the links between disarmament and development. We have some more distinguished speakers with us for this session. We start with Sally Ndungu from IPPNW. Is she there? Okay.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Ah, okay. Sally, great to have you with us. Over to you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my thoughts on the early lessons of the COVID-19 pandemic on health and development. Indeed, the UN's framework for the immediate socioeconomic response to the COVID-19 pandemic warns that this COVID-19 crisis is not only a health crisis, but has actually affected societies and economies to the core. And this really calls us to ponder on the effect of the crisis on health and development. And I think there are a number of both positive and negative lessons that we can learn from the COVID-19 pandemic when it comes to health and development. I thought about the best approach to go about this because it's really, really broad, but I think the best way to look at it is to take ourselves back to the Sustainable Development Goals and see how the lessons we can learn, both positive and negative, from guided by these Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll focus on my discussion, I'll focus especially on the first 5 and on also climate action and peace and justice. So I'll start by leading a discussion on the positive lessons. When it comes to the first development goal of ending poverty, no poverty, I think some of the positive things we've learned is that we actually have a lot of potential in terms of generating income in our various societies. So we've seen a lot of innovations coming up. People, because of the increased need, people have gone to the point of manufacturing their own personal protective equipment locally. They've gone to the point of manufacturing masks. So this has created a lot of job opportunities, even here locally in Kenya. So I think this is something we can borrow moving forward. The government needs to support young people's talents and ideas moving forward. You know, I think we need to learn and stop thinking of the only way to develop our countries and ending poverty is, contributing in certain ways. There's a lot of creativity among us. I think this is one of the lessons we can learn from the COVID-19 pandemic. And then also when you look at the third goal, good health and well-being, we still have seen a number of innovations in the health system, still in a bid to cope with the increased demand. And for example, we have countries now manufacturing their own ICU beds. Here we used to import these things, we used to rely on imports from China, for example. But now because of the increased demands and because other countries are also dealing with the same problem, we've had to be innovative and manufacture this ourselves. We also have had the government investing in continuous trainings of medical workers. And what this means is that the care that they're able to provide is better quality care. So I think even moving forward, that is a lesson that we need to learn. It is important for this to keep going, to continue equipping, capacity building healthcare providers so that the quality of care improves. A number of healthcare providers have moved to online consultation platforms. We are struggling to ensure that we have universal health coverage, and there are a number of things that come in the way. For example, the cost of actually accessing care is an issue. Some people have to incur that cost from the point of traveling, having to travel from where they live to the healthcare facility. So I think, you know, this coming up of online consultation platforms is something we can learn, because it provides cheaper access to consultation services, even if it has limitations in terms of examining patients, in terms of investigating them further. It still would help in identifying key symptoms, and then thereafter we can be able to follow up on the patients we get. So that's one another thing. And then we've seen the occasional mass testing by the government in the region, in the African context, for example, where we were still dealing with other infectious diseases, for example, tuberculosis and HIV and malaria. I think that's one of the things we can borrow. You know, the occasional screening is really important for prevention. An infectious disease like tuberculosis, for example, if the government invests in this on ground screening, as it has been done for COVID, it will really help in identifying patients early from the community stage and putting them on treatment. And of course, this will help curb community spread, and it will also help reduce drug resistance. Then another development goal is actually quality education. And during this pandemic, we've seen online platforms coming up for online learning. This has a lot of limitations, especially locally, but moving forward, I think it's still, especially for those people who are able to access internet services, it still helps them to be able to access quality education. You can be able to join even university learning wherever you are. You don't have to travel. You don't have to travel and go and reside, for example, in a different country. So this, I think, has really opened up our way of thinking and our eyes towards the opportunities, even in terms of accessing quality education. And lastly, when we think about positives, it's important to go a little bit on peace. And during this time, you know, the COVID-19 crisis, peace activists kept on working. One of the very big things that we've achieved is that recently we had 50 states sign the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And a lot of effort actually went into this, despite the fact that travel had been banned. So people were not able to meet and lobby governments and all that. A lot of things were being done online, but it's still quite commendable that despite all this, just I think a few weeks or a week or so ago, we were able to get to the 50 states ratifying the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which means that it's possibly going to enter into force in January next year. So that's an achievement, and it shows us that sometimes we think that campaigns and lobbying and all this is expensive because of traveling and all that, but we can still achieve so much, even if at very low cost. And then moving on to probably greater lessons on the negatives, when it comes to ending poverty, just to give a background of in the low and middle income countries, poverty was already an issue. And recently, for example, here in my country, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics recently reported that 53% of the population are actually they are poor in terms of multidimensional poverty. They lack not just income, but they lack the basic needs, shelter, clothing, access to information, social security, all those things. So, and then now with the restriction measures that were put in place by the government, and they're quite important in curbing the pandemic, we find that a number of people lost their jobs. The rate of unemployment actually doubled. I'm sure this is not a problem just in my country, but in other countries as well. And so then this, of course, has an impact on the poverty levels, the number of people who are able to who survive, who are living below the poverty line. And also a number of families also have lost their breadwinners. And of course, then this means that their source of income has been interfered with during this pandemic. And then there's also, in terms of hunger, food insecurity has really increased during this pandemic. And with already African countries and Asian countries were really suffering from malnutrition. And recently the government and its partners actually identified actually over 700,000 families living in urban settlements in the COVID-19 hotspot areas who are in dire need of food support. So, and you know, with food insecurity comes malnutrition, and this affects the health of the people, because with malnutrition, you're prone to getting infectious diseases, and your response even to treatment is slowed down and all that. So food is an important aspect when it comes to the health of the people. And then when it comes to health and well-being, a lot of things have happened here, a lot of things we can discuss and mention. Accessibility to healthcare has really, really decreased. I was recently involved in a study in which we were trying to assess the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on tuberculosis case notifications in the country. And one of the things we noticed is that actually during the first months of the pandemic, the health seeking of people generally, not just for tuberculosis services, but for all the other outpatient services really, really went down. And I would assume that this is a problem that cuts across, you know, because there's the fear. And also when it comes to infectious diseases such as tuberculosis, initially, the symptoms of COVID were understood to be quite similar to those of tuberculosis, you know, cough, chest pain. And so there was that stigma, and we lost a lot of patients whom we would have possibly detected. And so, of course, this increases the community spread and takes us miles back when it comes to us achieving the zero TB by 2030. And also, just to give a background, like locally where I come from, less than 16%, or well, about 16% of the population are covered by the National Health Insurance Scheme. So let me say only 16%. And the private insurance only caters to about 1% of the population. So all the rest are cash paying patients. And what this means, and even despite that, the insurance has not been catering for the COVID-19 expenses. And so people have not been going to seek treatment whenever they thought that they had the symptoms, or even when they had other symptoms, because of the fear of being screened and found to be positive and the inability to be able to pay for the services. So this has really, really limited the government's efforts to control the disease because of people staying at home and fearing to continuously seek care. And then I've mentioned the effect it has had on other infectious diseases, on TB, HIV also, because with the closure of schools, one of the things we've had is that we're seeing young people having earlier sexual debut. Early pregnancies also have risen. And with early sexual debut, of course, then that means that sexually transmitted diseases also have been on the rise. And one of these is, of course, HIV. And then there's also the impact on mental health. I was also involved in a study earlier on in a few months ago, screening for depression among pregnant women. And surprisingly, the proportion of women who are found to actually have depression was as high as 90%. And this has also been shown to be an issue in other countries. Mental depression has really increased in other countries. A number of studies have been done that have shown this. So a healthy nation, you know, health and development go together, because people who are not healthy are not able to work optimally and therefore build the economy. And then COVID-19 has also impacted on education. So because of the crisis, the government had to put lockdown measures in very many countries, I believe, and people moved on to online learning. But for example, in the region where I live, not everyone is able to access the internet. And so this online learning only applies to probably the rich in society who have access to internet. So there's a big proportion of people who are left out. And so, for example, the literacy level in Africa was at 70%, and this is probably something that will take us miles behind. I've talked about early pregnancies because the young people are idle, and what happens here is that when people get pregnant, then they eventually divert their attention from education to taking care of the young one. So again, now we have this really increases the proportion of people who end up being illiterate. And then one of the other sustainable development goals is on gender equality. And not only here in Kenya, but in other countries, I have seen that the number of the cases of intimate partner violence has really increased, maybe because of the stress levels, because people are being forced to stay at home and probably are not able to cope with this pressure. Gender-based violence was already an issue even before in various countries, and a lot of effort was being put in place to curb this, but this COVID-19 pandemic again just has made the issue worse. And lastly, when it comes to climate action and peace, I think this climate change and the impending threat of a nuclear war, those are actually immediate threats to planetary health. Probably right now, I would say they're more urgent than even the crisis that most countries, the COVID-19 crisis that most countries are already dealing with in one way or another. We need to learn from the COVID-19 pandemic, and a great lesson to learn is that global health issues such as this pandemic, such as climate change, such as nuclear, the possession of nuclear weapons by some countries, these are responsibilities of each and every one of us, regardless of where we live. Because one of the things that I've seen even in campaign efforts locally is that people think that nuclear war is not our issue. That is the issue of nuclear armed states. It's not really an urgent issue to us. We have other things to deal with. We have poverty, we have education, we have health and all that. But I think a lesson that we need to learn is that indeed we are all sort of living in one country. We are a global village. And just as the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us, in case a nuclear war erupts in any part of the world, each and every one of us, regardless of one's economic situation or place of residence, we would be affected in one way or another. And so we need to act and urgently act in preventing, forcing the nuclear armed states to disarm, and in taking care of our environment so that we don't end up getting to the point where we need to sort out climate change issues at a point where it's almost too late. Yes, I think those are my thoughts so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally. I should have said at the beginning that you were speaking from Kenya, but you made that quite clear. So thank you. And thank you for bringing us up to date on some of those issues, some of those really important issues that are affecting you, but also the majority of people in Africa, I guess. Let's move on now then to Bina Nepram from CAFI, who's the next speaker. Bina, over to you. Hear the Asian point of view.
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, friends who are joining in from around the world. I greet you in my indigenous language, Manipuri, Mayamna Tarambu Okcheri. I pay my respects to each one of you, panelists, speakers, people who are attending, council members from around the world. Thank you, Kito, Rauhanliitto, the Finnish group which is convening this along with our own International Peace Bureau. What a pleasure to be here in this really, really important and what I would call a historic moment in this year. I so wish I was in Finland. Once at a Disarmament Arms Trade Treaty meeting, a Finnish friend of mine, Markus Peltola, promised to take me fishing in Finland. So I was really wishing to, be in Finland at this particular convening to celebrate your 100 years and also go fishing. But guess COVID had different ideas. So we are now like fishing mentally online right now. So just wanted to recognize that. My name is Bina Nepram. I'm an indigenous scholar and human rights defender from the state of Manipur in northeast of India that borders Burma. And it's my pleasure to be with you at this panel speaking on development, disarmament, and COVID-19. I recognize my earlier colleagues, Sally, Jody, and Lucas will be joining, and my earlier panelists who had actually really elucidated some of these points. I know it's really getting depressing, hearing the statistics, seeing how, challenges that we face are. But I will write, in my presentation, I will bring in some of the challenges, of course, but I will rather like focus on solutions. And this is really, really important, and coming from where I am from, bringing our indigenous perspective, bringing our community perspective on how are we dealing with disarmament and development. So I will first make my presentation into a story of why some of us are doing the work of disarmament and why it is important for us to do this work. Number two is to look at what is happening globally, and finally, solutions. We really need alternate solutions, and this is where I'll be focusing on. Again, I was born in Manipur, which is an indigenous nation state home to 2.2 million people. You may have never heard of Manipur because this place is really unknown to the rest of the world, but Manipur and northeast of India is home to South Asia's longest running armed conflict. South Asia's armed conflicts are not just in Afghanistan or Pakistan. It started in my region, which is a region of about, altogether the Northeast, home to 45 million people, has a martial law imposed on us for the last 62 years. If you think that India is the world's largest democracy, you will be changing your mind by the end of my presentation. The reason is, as I repeat, that we are a world's largest democracy, but I have lived under martial law since my birth in Manipur in northeast of India. Because of this martial law, more than 50,000 people have been killed. We have got several armed groups operating here. As a result, we have so much of a humanitarian crisis. That crisis that you hear from Rohingya or Uyghurs are not the crisis that is stemming in from Asia, but we had over 400,000 people displaced in north of India because of this conflict. So my struggle and my work on disarmament, for me, was not a project work. It started with trying to find areas of strategy, areas of trying to find why there is war and conflicts, and what do we do to respond to them. And so as I was growing up, I started my research on mapping small arms and light weapons proliferation in my part of the world. The reason is, and then I found in my research that more than 58 types of weapons from 13 countries have flooded Manipur and northeast of India. America may have never heard of Manipur, but the American M16s became a favorite with many of our what is operating there. And India imported more than 300,000 AK-47 from Belgian weapons to actually do counterinsurgency in our part of the world. So we have severe human rights violations. We have a lot of people who have disappeared, mass graves. You may have only heard of Kashmir, but before Kashmir, India has looked at repression in a lot of ways. So my looking at disarmament for me, because I truly believe that non-violence is the way, and we started researching, writing on disarmament. So this is how, just to let you know how it started, and I set up the Manipur Women Gun Survivors Network in the year 2007 to work with women and indigenous people who are survivors of this conflict. And wars and conflicts do not affect those who create them because they are hiding behind military bunkers. Wars and conflicts affect 88% of the casualties in wars, conflicts, and disasters are people who are poor, indigenous, marginalized. These wars, conflicts have been done on our bodies, on our minds, and our lands. And this is why some of us do the work on disarmament that we do. As I said, India is a land which gave Gandhi. India gave yoga. Some of you must be practicing yoga. But in this country, we have no peace right now. So I just wanted to share that. Now let's see where we are right now. Globally, we have more than 48 million COVID cases. More than 1.2 million people have died. Our session should have a moment of silence for those who have died in this disaster, which is, as Dan and others have spoken, leads is basically because of the climate crisis and how we as humans have destroyed this earth. And more than 96 million people have been pushed into extreme poverty. And many of them are in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia, where I come from, and many of you are tuning in are listening to. Out of these 96 million people have been pushed in extreme poverty due to COVID-19. 47 million are women and girls. The gendered implication of this. And let me also put a fact that 70% of the responders and health workers during the COVID crisis were women and people from marginalized communities, 70%. So the marginalized, the communities who have faced and struggled this have been always those who have been left in the margins of society. 116 countries have closed down their borders. But the flip side, we are meeting here online. I always say between fortune and misfortune, I grew up in a war zone. I always said it's just 3 words, MIS, miss. So we convert this. So in as much as we get depressed thinking about how we were at lockdown, how many of us couldn't go out of our homes, how many of us have lost loved ones in this pandemic, how many have lost for us in Manipur, we have seen lockdowns even before the COVID-19. So this is nothing like, and as Philip also mentioned in his really, really inspiring speech, that democracy have backslided 14 years because of this crisis. So we are in a very, very tragic historical moment where we will have to reinvent how we and the world think about looking at peace, justice, and disarmament is what I would like to share. Now, as I mentioned, let's come to the point of like what is happening globally in terms of weaponization, wars, and peace. And it's very interesting that I, as an indigenous, minority woman from India, whenever I go to the UN, we go thinking, that our countries do not listen to us. So there's a global body where we go to. Going to the UN for the last 1 decade, and you feel really frustrated. UN is as good as what its member countries wants it to be. But the good thing about the UN is, I always say it's like they are like grandparents. So at least there's a global body, and we still want to believe that there's a global system that we all can sort of come together, like this convening, or at the UN, which we want to still believe in, and which are struggling right now. The UN Charter states that the least diversion of armaments of the world to human and economic resources. It's in the UN Charter that it tells the nations of the world not to divert resources for weapons and war. Yet the 190 plus member states of the United Nations are doing exactly the opposite. The permanent P5 members of the UN Security Council produces 88% of the world's weaponry. And many of these wars, which originates, are now fought in the global south, where we are. We talk about wars and refugees. 85% of the world's refugees are not in the global north. They are actually in the global south. But the right-wing rhetorics has made people hateful towards refugees and migrants precisely of their bad politics. But it is a global south which houses 85% of the world's global refugees. Again, our colleagues has mentioned, at least the countries of the world agreed to a sustainable development goal. Goal 16 talks about how do we need to connect gender, disarmament, peace, and arms, stopping of proliferation of arms is absolutely there. And we want to believe in our governments. The government, I said, should be like a second set of parents, but they are actually following neoliberal policies, listening only to multinational corporations, and this needs to be stopped. And so these are some of the concerns that we have in terms of where we are. The global military expenditure, as many of our colleagues said, right now stands last year at 1917 billion. And then we have the largest spender of arms, as many of you mentioned. And it is really sad that India, which is my country of more than 500 plus million poor, of which millions of them walked home during this COVID crisis, walked for months to reach their homes, where billions have now reduced to poverty lines. We are the world's second largest importer of weapons in the world. Compare this to the fact that we are 112 on the global gender index. Look at how skewed and how unequal this world is. I pay taxes in my country, and these taxes light our streets, make our social infrastructure, our public infrastructure. But if a woman in India walks at 9 o'clock in the night because of our work, we are asking for it. That's why every 22 minutes, a woman, a girl child as young as 6 months old, have been sexually assaulted every 22 minutes in Gandhi's India, precisely because of a way in which the rhetoric in our country is a very, very nationalistic ethics in terms of in which the issue of women and gender has been completely left out of our national discourse. In fact, I have said many times in India that violence against women should be declared as a national security crisis if every 22 minutes there's a physical assault on a girl child as young as 6 months old. And is this not a national security crisis, as the security analysts, which are mostly male, call it in my country? So we need a real new paradigm to be looking at it. So as I mentioned, that there is the global backsliding. So many of our colleagues today have also mentioned the world that we are in. We really have to understand where we are, to understand our past, know what is happening in our present, to be able to determine our future. And this is what the solutions and my last part of my presentation will be. In fact, a lot of us have agency. We all think that, oh my God, there is so much of war, there's so much of conflict, there's so much of COVID now. What do we do? There's a feeling of sadness. But as some of you have mentioned, on one hand, during COVID-19, it was really beautiful. On one hand, everyone was in a lockdown, and of course, there has been a lot of negative trends to it. But on the other end, I saw a lot of my friends taking to farming. They started connecting more with nature. They started sort of taking care of their health, taking care of their families, the relevance of taking care of our own lives. So there's a lot of inner inflection which has gone on during these very, very momentous times. So I think we also have to, at this time, at this historic convening of 100 years of Rauhanliitto as well as IPB's really work, which has been really going on strongly, to reflect where we are and where is our agency as individuals, as people who are committed to the path of peace. I have been to many, many disarmament negotiations, including the International Arms Trade Treaty. I was at the negotiation of also the banning cluster mines, cluster bombings. I've been part of the international campaign to ban landmines. And also I was there when the nuclear ban treaty happened right inside the United Nations in New York that year. I was right there when it happened. Now, after more than a decade and a half of watching global disarmament movements, I have tremendous love and respect for all those who have worked very hard at it. But I also realize that every one of us have been working in silos, in little boxes of disarmament. And for me, one of the important solutions that we have to understand at this moment in history is that we got to connect together. We cannot work in silos because that's what the colonial neoliberal powers will do. Divide us in silos. Let us chase the funders' money. In fact, I always said that if disarmament has to be beyond fundraising, it has to be commitment which goes beyond just a project of 2 years, 10 years, or it doesn't end when a treaty has been signed. In spite of the International Arms Trade Treaty being signed, we have more wars and more weapons transfer than ever before. Disarmament treaties cannot stop the world from war and more violence. What is really needed is what Dan Smith spoke today at his plenary, it is keynote speech. He said, we need ordinary people responding to extraordinary times. And this is what I'm going to share and end right now. As I mentioned, that I come from the state of Manipur, and I am what I am because of an amazing 104-year-old indigenous women's movement, which started from the grassroots in my home state, Manipur. It started in the year 1904. The British colonized my part of the world in 1891. And at that time, when the colonial British power was trying to force Manipuri men to go into literally like forced labor, it was the women, indigenous women of Manipur, who resisted that, realizing that British soldiers don't touch women's bodies. So the Manipuri women, my ancestors, formed a body of wall and stopped the British soldiers from forcibly recruiting Manipuri men in forced labor, and negotiated that they be paid for the work they do, resulting in what is called Manipur's first women's war of 1904. And then we have the second women's war of 1939. And this experiences, and which later when India imposed a martial law, the Manipuri women organized what is called the Maira Paibi movement, means women with bamboo torches, and patrol the streets of Manipur at night to be able to protect because the part of Manipur that I come from is so heavily militarized that for every 20 of us, there's one Indian military person. We have a martial law. So it was the indigenous women, our mothers and grandmothers in Manipur, who actually showed us the path of how do we do peace and disarmament at the grassroots, a term which I call household disarmament, that we got to the disarmament that we talked about has to be start from our household. It is to start with our minds. It cannot start with the UN treaty and end top-down approach. We need a bottom-up approach towards disarmament. And this is what I would like to share. We have to invert this particular. The other thing that I would like to share very closely is I am a part of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, a women-led organization which was founded, I think, in 1915 after World War I. And they have a campaign called Follow the Money. You know, you and I, many of us who are here tuning today, we pay our taxes. But governments in India said, oh, you cannot ask money or where your money is going for national security. We don't even know what is national security, but we are blocked from asking questions. For every $1 of tax that an American taxpayer pays, $55% goes to the military industrial complex. It is time to hold our governments accountable. So to work on disarmament, while we do treaties and negotiations and do conferences, what we got to do in our own nations is to work with our parliamentarians, people who claim to represent us, and ensure that we have disarmament from a bottom-up approach where it is citizens' initiative. It's about a disarmament which makes sense, which I call making disarmament meaningful to the lives of people. And to end, it is very important in today's digital world, as much as we have a digital divide, and I recognize what my colleague said, and in as much as many of us are linked online, there are a million others who cannot be on online platforms. We got to remember that we got to work for them. And it's really important that grassroots level, bottom-up approach towards disarmament is really important. So my last words are to be able to ask questions or follow the money. Where is our money going? As Rainer also mentioned, and he said a very important thing of how a 1-hour flight of an F-45 produces pollution, which is like equivalent to 150,000 cars pollutant emissions. And Wilf also mentioned that, you know, the F1 cost of one fighter jet, one F-35 cost is the same as a global feminist movement money, which is 110 million. So this is one fighter jet can, you know, sort of the price of that can and actually get a global, women's movement up and running for ensuring gender justice and peace. So just to show how the only thing is how badly our money is spent. And we have nations which are mostly, and that's why it's so important to get women, indigenous people, people of minorities, people of color into this kind of disarmament. It's really, really important. And to be able to understand where we are. And I would like to sort of end with the words that, as I mentioned, peace for us is not like a project. It's a commitment of a lifetime. Please involve and let people, marginalized people, be our own agency in the work for disarmament and peace. Let us speak, let us decolonize the way war and peace and conflict resolution processes have been. It is really important. And to the people who are warmongers, to the authoritarian regime, this is my answer to them. Our quest for peace is greater than their thirst for war and power. And together, I would like to unite with all of us here to continue this work 2020 onwards in this historic 100 years of the peace, the Finnish peace movement. We need a new paradigm of peace. We need and to start today. And thank you so much. Kito, Yamna Nungaijeri in my indigenous language. Thank you, IPB. And thank you, Rainer, and all of you at IPB for your amazing work. I've been so inspired to be a part of this team and continue to be with you in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bina, for those passionate words from India. I think we're already running very short of time, so we'll move straight on now to Jordi Calvo, from speaking from near Barcelona, if not in Barcelona.
Thank you very much, Dave, and thanks to IPB, to Rauhanliitto for organizing this seminar and also for this important meeting for us, the Council. I will try to be brief, and I will try to offer also something to complete the interventions of Sally and Bina. More focus on the question of the approach from how the arms proliferation and the militarization is creating a fake development, because in fact I'll try to just to show with 3 main points. In fact, one of the main arguments for politicians to give support to militarization and to military spending, that at the end is a political decision every year in the public budget of every country, is that it helps to have a better economy, a more competitive, and mainly the focus is put in the creation of jobs. At least this is the case in many countries, as is it the case in Spain. So the first aspect related to that, I think needs to be focusing the question of that Paul Samuelson already put in the economy books. I remember when I studied economy, my first book was the Samuelson book, and was an explanation about tanks, the decision between tanks or butter. I think now with the new context and the new reality, we could use this, we could redefine this comparison, and we could use it to talk about and to decide between tanks or ventilators, or tanks or ICU beds, or tanks or nurses or doctors. So that's the question of the cost of opportunity. We saw in the Global Days Against Military Spending of this year that we with this comparison we got a lot of attention, and we could get a lot of new organizations from other sectors, not only the peace sector, promoting and helping and disseminating the message of the need of reducing the militarization, as organizations from development and from other sectors. Another indicator that can help us also to see the importance of this cost of opportunity that we create in the economy. I was checking the numbers from the ODA, the Official Development Aid for 2019, and the military spending data that we really well know from SIPRI. And we can see that the last year with data, we are investing 12 times more in military spending in the world than in development, using the numbers from ODA. So that means that the priorities are put in another way, and it has an impact in the economy we have, and it has an impact in the development that we are getting. The second point that I wanted to share with you was related to the job creation. I could say that in the first one could be the question of costs of opportunity, and I would say that in this case would be the job opportunity. There is a fallacy or a lie related to the military economy that it creates employment. And the main study related to that, and maybe we need to make many more in different countries or different regions, but the main study that we can have access easily in internet done about the impact of investing in the military and the creation of jobs is done by the Watson Institute in the Brown University. And it's the institute that has a line, has a field of research called Costs of War, and it's really interesting, all the numbers that they have there. And they show and they prove that the money invested in the military is creating 50% less jobs than the money invested in other sectors like education, health, or clean energy. For instance, with numbers that they offer, they say that $1 billion invested in the military creates 11,200 jobs in the military, but in education is more than double, and in health and in clean energy is close to 20,000. So that is something that we need to highlight and to explain to our governments, to our politicians, and to confront with them. Maybe because sometimes this is the main argument they use, the fallacy, the lie of the employment creation. But there is also another one related to the economy that is good to have in mind. That is the fallacy of the wealth creation of the money invested in the military industry, in arms companies. Because at the end, we are talking about public money, and the public money from the public budget is going to the private companies. Private companies, they earn money, they have profit, they produce weapons that are bought by governments, by the Ministry of Defense, by armies, by the militaries. And at the end, we can have two options. If we don't use this product that we bought, that means that from an economical point of view, you shouldn't spend that money because you didn't need it. But if you use it, it's even worse because you are destroying and you need to rebuild and you need to invest more in all that. So this is what is happening from this point of view, that the military economy and the military budget is really having a negative impact always in development and in the economy. And then to finish, the third point I wanted to share with you is related to COVID, how COVID has been used by the military and by many governments as an opportunity to increase the military spending and to increase the militarization and to increase the use of militaries. And this is based in the use of fear. This is a feeling that we have everywhere because of COVID, and they know, and they know very well that in these situations of shock, you can take advantage and use the opportunity that can give it to you. And this is done under the umbrella of what we call the securitization of any aspect of life. And they are in fact making us thinking that a military response to COVID is the best way to control a pandemic and to help for our health. Let's say that they use militaries against the virus, and they use militaries in the same way that they are using militaries against migrants or movements of population. And this, let's say this approach based on securitization, on that this is the best way to control everything based in a military approach, at the end is creating and legitimizing the militarization in the world, because we are seeing that the militaries, they are like being used as police. So there is a politicization of the militaries, because they are not used for many other things in many countries. So if they are not used, that means that we should cut the cost that is supposed for the country. In the same way that we can see since long time ago that we are suffering a militarization of the police. So that can be a trend. That can be a trend, that we have the politicization of the armies and the militarization of the police. So just to finish, we need to really demand the governments, politicians, to make a choice, the political choice, because this is a political decision. It's not based, we see that it's not based in efficiency. The economy is harming the economy when we are investing in military. We need to make the choice, arming or disarming. We need to make the choice between militarization or development. And I finish here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jordi. Thank you. And I think if we just move on quickly to our last speaker, our last remarks from our last speaker, Lucas Werl from the IPB office, I guess, in Berlin anyway. Over to you, Lucas.
Hello, everybody. I assume you can hear me. I think a lot of things have been said that I wanted to say in a similar way. I tried to keep it short and maybe cut out some of the parts that I wanted to say. But for me, bluntly speaking, when you look at Trump over the last 4 years, and if you look at the elections, you see what disarmament and development is not standing for. And the other way around, disarmament and development stands for values, morals, and ethics in the day-to-day dealing with people on one planet. So it's about justice, solidarity, participation, trust, unity, human decency, cooperation, democracy, and internationalism. And you can add many, many more. But right now, I think we are in a phase of the decline of human-centered values, morals, and ethics. We're in a spiral of securitization, but I think mostly we are also in the spiral of militarization. When you look at the militarization processes over the last couple of years, militarization and military is increasingly infiltrating all kinds of parts of our society. It's not just technical developments, so-called modernization of nuclear weapons, or now weapons in space, the robotization of warfare with artificial intelligence, missile defense, the military spending of NATO, the 2%. We have cyberspace, we have migration, we have economic interests that all would serve in the NATO strategy as a reason and purpose to wage a war and call for collective defense within NATO. We have increasingly economic warfare. To me, sanctions are a form of by other means, but it has or may have similar effects. If you look at Iran and in the 90s, Iraq, you see how many people died there due to sanctions. And the pandemic has been hijacked also by the military. You have NATO, who was very, very active from the very beginning, highlighting its importance in coordination to obtain only for its partners and member states medical equipment. The German army, the Bundeswehr, also in Germany bought lots of equipment, and they never got tired to highlight their role in obtaining masks and other things that were needed at this time. NATO is discussing a NATO mission called Allied Hand. This is also complete selfish and only for member state, for members and for close partners to exchange experts, military experts, or military personnel being experts in the health sector, if there is something like this. They want to exchange military doctors and health personnel that is under the frame of military. We had the European Union budget to face the pandemic that also had a small portion of the budget dedicated to military. And on the national level, I'm quite sure you have many, many examples how the military got involved in some form of or the other in this pandemic. Via the IPB Youth Network, we started an open letter to Stoltenberg calling to cancel the NATO 30 Youth Summit, which will take part this Monday. I will send you a link where you can sign this open letter after my talk. But for me, it's a really strong militarization, and so to say, the last bastions of society that exist are being militarized. Right now, with the pandemic, it's health. With the NATO 30 Youth Summit, it's more and more youth. And these areas are said to be conquered by militaristic logic and militaristic concepts. If you look at the reaction to migrant crisis, the lockdown of Europe, not dealing appropriately with causes of migration, war being amongst one of the most prominent ones. Having military missions of the European Union against migration. The reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement, where Trump was mobilizing unmarked special forces to reproduce violence against protesters. So it's really, I think, a difficult situation. And for me, militarism is also not just a single phenomenon. It's connected to economic exploitation, to authoritarianism, and it's a cultural phenomenon. And we have to set the values, human-centered values, humanist values, ethics and morals against it. And at this point, I would quickly say something about the pandemic we're in. A pandemic is something that is human-made. It's a social construct. And I'm not saying that there isn't a pandemic or that we are not living in a very serious and dangerous time for all humans on this planet. But the way we deal with it, or our politicians deal with it, this is a social construct. And it is based in this cultural phenomenon of militarism, economic exploitation, authoritarianism. In Germany yesterday, there was a debate to change the infection protection laws to make them more suitable to this situation we are living in. As of now, none of the decisions concerning regulation and getting under control this pandemic was democratic. Parliamentarians do not have a say in this. It's the political leaders, the hour of the governments, one could say. Multinational corporations are profiting from the situation we are in. Who owns the patents to the vaccines that are being developed. Several hundred corporations are working on this globally, partly with government money, with our money. Who owns the patents for this? Who owns the patents for the testing that is going on? Who has access to the results, and how can you use them? Or issues of control and surveillance, which would have been possible 20 years ago, are now a realistic scenario in order to continue life as we know it, or close to as we know it. And I also have the feeling that the concept of fear is also very much applied in this situation. I know it's very difficult. It's a very serious situation that we're in. But I think there could have been completely different responses that we were seeing over the last now almost 8 months. But what can we actually do to overcome this cultural phenomenon? You know, how can we work? We have to highlight the values that we stand for around a humanist and around a human-centered approach. And the culture of peace is something that we need to highlight much more, and we need to highlight the values that we stand for and connect them to other issues and other partners. We have to work intersectional. And it was mentioned earlier, I think 2 or 3 times, we need to increasingly stimulate international and this intersectional dialogue and cooperation. It's really a phenomenon also that I have the feeling we're kept so busy on national levels that a lot of the actors in the peace movement and other social movements have lost their international focus over the last couple of years. And I think IPB is a wonderful platform to foster this dialogue and to stimulate it. Yeah, having this said, we need to actively reach out or to increase. We are doing this on the levels that we can, but we probably have to increase it, or have to remind us to more persistently do it. You know, small-scale agricultural movements, GMO, pesticide movements, movement for the democratization of IT, of the internet, this open source movement, youth, migrant movements, indigenous movements, women's movements, human rights movements, and there's plenty more. We have to try to connect to them. And I think today the form of having a Zoom meeting or a webinar is a wonderful form to connect, or to start connecting to these different movements and to reach out to them. The Build Back Better framework, I think is a good one, but will it be enough? Should we focus on bringing peace into this movement, or should we also focus on bringing peace to the people who want to get involved in this? We need to highlight the United Nations. They are being undermined so much these days, and it's the best we have, so we have to promote it. We are doing it, but maybe we can do it more. And I think it's a problem of capacities that we are having. It's the capacities and the resources rather than a willingness for dialogue or efforts to reach out. And the TPNW is a wonderful link. We have a window of opportunity now that we should use over the next couple of months and also years. There's a lot of movement going on in this area of disarmament right now, and how can we utilize this? Build Back Better, I already said. Also, the pandemic, connect to social scientists, to medical organizations, and start a discussion. The Black Lives Matter movement, we have already done events with them. I think they were great, but what can we do more? And also, how can we, in this difficult situation, highlight the Sustainable Development Goals and help that important aspects of international relations will not be forgotten. And for me, IPB is really a wonderful organization, and its partners as well. We have wonderful partners all over the world and wonderful partner organization, and we need to continue to uphold the life-centered values, the culture for peace, humanist and nonviolent ethics and morals, and act accordingly and spread this information as broad as possible. And I hope that we continue to become a platform for exchange and education in these fields and extend our outreach to other professions and movements and sectors of society that we have not reached out to yet, or that we only have reached out to in small facets and not as broadly or insistingly as we should have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucas. I think that we've had a fantastic session here too. I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to raise a hand if you want to say something. We are running over time, but I don't think that matters too much. We've still got most of you here with us. And then we'll call on Ingeborg to give her final comments and sort of summing up. I just wanted to say that I think what's come through all of the speeches that we've had, all of the talks, all of the comments that we've had, is this kind of requirement to return to human values, to think about human values as being core to everything that we do and practice. And we have got instances, we've got examples of how we have a common feeling for humanity, what that means throughout the world. We've got things like the human rights, our acceptance for human rights, our acknowledgement of international law, that these things can be developed in a cooperative fashion, and we have this kind of core set of understandings and beliefs which we can always turn to. And I think that's come through. We need to return to that. We need to make human values great again, to use the kind of common phrase that's being deployed elsewhere. I don't see any hands being raised. I also see Ingeborg's left the room. Oh no, she's coming back now.
Panos.
Sorry, we have a hand?
Thank you.
Panos raised his hand.
Sorry, Panos. Okay, Panos.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. I enjoyed the introductory speeches, and I would say that I was impressed by the speech of our Asian speaker, and because the circumstances require not to miss the global horizon in these circumstances. I want to make only 2 points. One point is, as we speak about the global horizon because of the pandemic and the relation of disarmament, development, and disarmament and human rights, as you said, Dave, or universal human values, it's a better expression, universal human values. We should perhaps recall and recampaign for a proposal submitted 1995 in the Social Summit in Copenhagen for a World Social Charter, for those who remember Copenhagen 1995. Second point I want to make is that as Trump most probably is out of the White House, which is good news for the world, not only for the Americans, we must return to putting pressure on European governments, those who have not complied, not to increase military spending to 2% of their GDP. Let's therefore tell them that as Trump is not putting pressure, I hope that Biden will not put the same pressure as Trump to increasing the military spending of European countries, members of NATO, to 2% of their GDP. I think this is an action proposal I wanted to submit. Third point I want to make, it was mentioned already, I think, that the pandemic has facilitated the neoliberal governments across Europe and the world to promote, instead of increasing support for the national health service, the national health systems, they have turned to the private sector, to the private health sector, as it happens in Greece. Instead of supporting the national health system, which is very weak already because of our previous crisis, they now finance in practice the private health sector. This is it. And finally, I would say what has been already said, that if the IPB did not exist, we should invent it right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I have two requests to speak now, and also to mention that Tarja Kronberg will also say a few words at the end. So we'll have the questions or the comments, then we'll have Ingeborg and then Tarja at the end. So I think the first request to speak came from Vapu. So,
hello.
Okay. Yep.
Hello, thank you. I would like to thank you because this has been very inspiring session, all the sessions today. And especially I'm inspired by the women speakers. Sally, you and I, we are from IPPNW, and you both about against silos. So IPPNW started ICANN movement, and this is a good example against silos, but we need more of that, and that's something we have to do now. Thank you all you speakers there. Thank you.
Thank you, Vapu. And also now a request for a question from Julia.
Hi, thank you. This is not a question directly from me, but from one of the attendees. I was asked to elaborate, or I would rather ask Rainer or Jordi or Philip or Lisa to elaborate on what collaboration IPB already has with different climate change movements and climate activists, just to be a bit more detailed on the work that IPB does in that regard. So if anyone feels up to answering the question, maybe they can raise their hand or just go ahead. Thank you.
I think Jordi will start, and I love to follow Jordi.
Okay, I can just explain our relation with the climate change movement on our GCOMS campaign. I think that we are getting closer to the climate change movement. And we saw that this year, when we were relating the military spending and other aspects, no, like health, that was very related to our lives, no, our real life now, and what worries us now in our normal life. We got a lot of organizations really contributing and participating and taking the GCOMS campaign and using our arguments and our infographics. So I think that was the first step. We saw Greenpeace, and we have been participating in some of the mobilizations or meetings just before, the situation when it was possible, with the Fridays for Future and all the new movements for climate change, against climate change, and we could see that we are close, but we need to, let's say, to see what we have in common. There's still a lot to do, because sometimes the peace movement, we have our narrative that is different to the narrative of these other movements. Maybe it's generational, maybe the difference comes from different places, and this is what we still need to improve, to see that at the end is the same. Well, we are together fighting for the same, because peace and environmental justice is the same.
Only to add some points of the IPB work. One of the supporting organizations of our Berlin conference, hopefully again of our Barcelona conference, is Friends of the Earth, the biggest European network of environmental groups. Also, IPB was attending with side events quite a lot of these climate summits, including the Paris Climate Summit. So we are going first steps in the direction of more common work, but it is not easy. And it takes a lot of time that in the climate movement was understood that the 2% are a very important common point, because more spending for military purposes means less for environmental issues. But this needs some time, because before the environmental organization understood this. And hopefully the fight against these 2% will continue together. But I'm also not so sure about it, but I'm looking for some comments that now under Biden, is the 2% fight over? I can only say who was creating these illusions. Biden was several times saying that he's supporting 2%, and definitely he will do it. So I think we need also some common discussions with our environmental friends about the next steps. And I hope that Barcelona conference next year will be a good common action and a common activity point for both sides, environmental and peace movement.
Thank you, Rainer and Jordi. It's interesting to note that we had a webinar here in the UK recently discussing these connections, and somebody pointed out that the military is aware of the environmental issues, and so it does things. It says things like, well, we know what's happening. We've taken the lead out of our bullets. We use organic washing powder, all those kind of greenwash kind of statements. So, we have to be prepared for that kind of nonsense as well, I think, to counter that. So they are aware of their impact on the environment. We have to make sure that they have a conscience about that too, as well as just being aware of it. Okay, great. I think that's all I have. Lucas has sent a sign-on, the open letter to Stoltenberg, a link to that you can use to sign on to the letter. So I think that's it. Let's move then on to a summing up, really, by Ingeborg, I think. You're ready, Ingeborg?
Yes, ready. North of the polar circle with a rising sea level. I'm very happy to be with you and to congratulate the Finnish Peace Union on their anniversary, I would have loved to be in Helsinki today with the IPB friends, but we are not allowed for the time being. And I have to admit that even in this context, it feels good to be with you all. I wish lots of success, continued success, and energy for the Finnish Peace Union. We need you. The COVID-19 pandemic makes direct contact, hugs and embrace sadly more difficult. But at the same time, we have become so much more skillful in web communication. Actually, in this sense, the world is becoming much more open than ever before, and networking is facilitated. That is, of course, among those of us with access to the World Wide Web, those of us that are not left behind. We do not know what this situation will do to us personally, socially, economically, politically, nor do we know the long-term effects. We have today heard a series of enlightening and inspiring presentations. Thank you so much. It has been wonderful. But the complexity that the situation reveals makes it very difficult to make a clear statement on the vision of the culture of peace as initiated by UNESCO under these circumstances. Can the COVID-19, with all its pain, sorrow, and uncertainty, still provide a new window of opportunity for developing a culture of peace? Can it inspire change? Can it lead to many more people being aware of the situation? Can they be involved in strategic and practical steps to build back better? Can it help create more space for international true cooperation, for critical thinking, and cooperation between the peace movement, as we have spoken so much about, and all the young people desperate for climate peace, justice, a sound and healthy environment, Green New Deals, circular economy, and less market and consumer orientation. The pandemic X-rays and amplifies the blatant existing inequalities and injustices. More people, or at least so it seems, are able to see and question a world situation with more than 1.9 trillion US dollars per year for the military, whilst we are not managing to provide the necessary resources for adequate health care and meeting the basic needs of people. It seems that it is becoming more obvious to a growing number of people that the military simply is not able to protect us against the real and existential threats to humankind and to the planet, such as the environmental and climate crisis, the fast-growing nuclear threat, and also the fast-growing and huge inequalities shaping a precariat full of angry young people deprived of education and opportunities, and with the risk of being led into authoritarian and fundamentalistic thinking and action. But is this growing insight enough to counter the fear that dominant power structures are permanently trying to install in all of us of the other, of those who will come and take our riches, our land, and undermine our values? Is it enough to stand against the enemy images that are created? Is it enough to stand against the massive propaganda made to legitimize and support the war industry and all those who directly or indirectly live from and take their status from these totally outdated and dangerous so-called security measures? Are people able to see that the military so-called security is no security, provides no security, but just is an old patriarchal power structure that benefits the few, that misuses our natural resources, that undermines the very essence of the UN to build peace by peaceful means, and contributes unshamefully and very substantially to a devastating climate change as one of the world's major polluters, and all that primarily outside any climate reporting. It is absurd and economically, ecologically, and ethically unacceptable. Instead, as highlighted by IPB, we need to develop a human security which secures us from the real and existential threats. We need a common, non-militarized security that works for all. The vision and the concept and the program and the movement of a culture of peace was developed as an alternative to the culture of war and violence. It opened up a broad-based reflection on possible new visions and scenarios for the future, involving researchers and teachers and artists and politicians, peace activists, the women organizations, youth organizations, and some governments who found in the culture of peace an umbrella and a platform for fruitful exchange and mutual inspiration. Highly diverse groups and initiatives dealing with issues such as environment, human rights, development, disarmament, human security, gender equality, and youth issues related constructively to the culture of peace concept, encompassing, as we know, not only peace as absence of war, but with focus on the content and the conditions for peace. UNESCO tried with this initiative to revitalize major international normative instruments which are basic to the United Nations mission, and first and foremost, to save future generations from the scourge of war. UNESCO actually managed to use the opening that was created by the breakdown of the Cold War as the intellectual and ethical organ of the UN, the rebel of the system, so to say. UNESCO was very well placed to take this culture of peace initiative. It has a broad mandate. to help create peace through international cooperation within the fields of education, science, culture, and communication, which makes it possible for UNESCO with a holistic approach. And the Constitution has a preamble that we all know: since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that defenses for peace must be constructed. The whole UNESCO was put to work under the inspiring leadership of the then Director General Federico Mayor. We worked enthusiastically around the clock, and we actually thought that we would be able to make a better world. A program for a culture of peace was developed to be used both at an international level, at national levels, and by civil society. It was adopted by the UN system as a whole, and the year 2000 was made the International Year for a Culture of Peace. And we found it fantastic to open a new millennium under the Culture of Peace umbrella. The year was followed by the Decade for a Culture of Peace and Nonviolence for the Children of the World, a Manifesto 2000 for the Culture of Peace was made and signed by 75 million people. And it was a confrontation and an analysis of myths that have been hindering the developments towards peace for a long, long time, such as the myth that if you want peace, you have to prepare for war, and that nothing can change because violence is inevitable and intrinsic to human nature. And thirdly, that violence is an effective means and method for solving problems and disputes. The Culture of Peace initiative was breaking down with the attacks on the Twin Towers in the US, 11th September 2001, and the following fight against terrorism and the fear that it created in all of us. The fact that this huge, broad, and important movement was stopped on a national and international level, except by civil society organizations, and not least the peace movement, the women's movement, and the youth movement, makes it all the more important for IPB and for the peace movement to take the lead in furthering the visions of a culture of peace as developed. We have all the important documents. We have also since then got the UN Declaration on the Right to Peace, which states everybody has the right to enjoy peace, such that all human rights are promoted and practiced and protected, and development is fully realized. We have now also the UN Agenda for Sustainable Development, where the culture of peace vision would have been able to make it even more humanistic than it is, but we have fought for Sustainable Development Goal 16. We need to link the culture of peace to SDG 16 and also to the SDG 4.7 on education for global citizenship non-violence, and a culture of peace. So how do we overcome all these obstacles to a culture of peace? I think it is important, and it has also been underlined today, to be solution-oriented and to be future-oriented. The hallmark of the peace movement has always been the very high level of knowledge and the high humanistic values. In a digitalized world order, it has become more difficult to know what is true and what is fake. Could it help if we develop ethical codes of conduct, as we have for medical doctors, also for other important professions, for instance, for scientists, for journalists, for politicians? And how do we help open platforms for real dialogues, not debates, not discussions, but dialogues where we can learn to listen, learn to understand, learn to be respectful, and also learn to share our doubts, not being totally sure of how we are to go forward. It is difficult for the peace movement in a situation where there is no much decency and kindness and understanding in the political top spheres. How do we meet it when we want to be decent? How do we meet those that are not thinking in the way that we do? And how do we manage to get the money we need? Because it has been obvious through the Cultural Peace Program in UNESCO, it is obvious today that we don't have enough competence, capacity. I mean, we have the competence, but we do not have enough capacity to do the work that we would like to do. Would establishing national peace structures, such as ministries for cultural peace, help channel resources for building a culture of peace? Could we refuse to pay the part of the gross national product that goes for military purposes? For those of us in the NATO context, it is at least 2% for the time being. Could we use this money? We would pay the tax, but it should go into a peace fund so that it can be used for the purposes that we all have. That would be a peace tax instead of a military war preparing tax. And how do we make theories translate into practical measures? How do we get from utopia to praxis? We used to say that we should cultivate peace as we cultivate plants. We should be the farmers and gardeners of peace. With the misuse of our planet, we might have to do both now. We might need to both cultivate the land and cultivate peace. I would just end by saying that a major issue for us is to discuss the strategy for change. And we know that peace education and quality education is extremely important. We know that role models inspire. But as I have heard all of you today. I think that this open dialogue and strategizing is what we can continue with immediately. So thank you to IPB for this platform. And let me just end by a few quotes. Women have been very essential in this COVID-19 situation. Let me quote Eleanor Roosevelt. She said in the UN, "Nobody won the last war and nobody will win the next." And Philip quoted Bertha von Suttner. She also said, and I'm quoting from Die Waffen nieder, down with the weapons, "We need to create an active disgust for war." So since we are for gender equality, my two last quotes will be from men. John Lennon said, "Peace is not something you wish for. It is something you make, something you do, something you are, and something you give away." And Hafiz said, and I think that is a good last suggestion, "Stay close to anything that makes you glad you are alive." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingeborg. I think we've had so much to think about today in these two sessions, and there's some more things to think about there. I think we've actually run way over time, but I don't think, I certainly don't feel that matters. We've had some really inspiring speeches and some really wonderful things to consider and think about. And I'm pretty sure IPB will be there trying to take these issues forward, trying to make some solutions to the problems that we have. Just before we go, we'd like to hand over to Tarja Kronberg to give the final few words. And before that, I'd just like to say, I'd like to add my congratulations and also hope to celebrate later on 100 years of the Peace Union of Finland. So over to you, Tarja, for a final few words.
Thank you. And as a Finn, I am also regretting that I cannot be in Helsinki, but I'm in Copenhagen, and my last words will be with you from this city, which Denmark is actually one of the countries that are in Europe are very much exposed to the rising water levels. And it's very difficult to defend a country which is an island state like Denmark. An additional question is that I don't think you have heard about it, but we are just experiencing in Denmark a very great risk of a new pandemic, parallel pandemic to the COVID-19. And what is happening is that it has been found out that the mink farms in northern Jutland have a new mutation on the COVID-19. And actually it has gone over to people. And there's now, with the healthcare system in Denmark and the world, a worry that this will be a global parallel pandemic. Now, what is happening yesterday and today is that 17 million mink are slaughtered and buried. And we hope that this COVID new parallel pandemic will not emerge, and it will be limited, hopefully, to northern Jutland. But what we can hear from this is also that we need new, not only human security, we also need different ways of dealing with animals and how we treat them in the world. So with this, I would like to add to Dave's and Ingeborg's appeal for human security, sort of maybe a more concrete security agenda for this triangle, climate for peace, between the war and peace issues, between climate change and health questions. And I think the peace movement was faced a couple of years ago, or many years ago, with this challenge of climate change. And I think the links and some of the goals are well established now. And Rainer was talking about the impact of the military on the climate change. The financing questions has been taken up by George and Barcelona. So I think the work is well underway to make this link between climate change and the peace movement. Maybe we need to improve the contacts between the institutions and the NGOs, but we are on our way. What is new this year is the question of our health and how it has come to dominate all issues. And there maybe we are not so far. And I think Ingeborg's last quotation was about keep close. And I think we are told all the time now to keep distance. So I think we have to find a balance here and maybe keep close with the closest and keep a distance to others. But I would like to, and I would like to hear, underline what Bina said, that we cannot work in silos. And I think this triangle of the future agenda, security agenda for the peace movement will just show that it is impossible. I'll make 3 short points. One is the question of our security being common. I mean, I think this pandemic has shown that no one is safe unless everybody is safe. And we have to work together. And I think some of the hoarding examples nationally on the protective measures has been an exorbitant example of not working together and sort of trying to steal from others. I think this is an issue we must see as a common security. The next question is the question of crossing borders. And I think we have seen in the pandemic, at least, that no one can isolate. New Zealand did a good job. I think they are also fearing now the increasing number of people who are getting sick, but you cannot isolate. I mean, New Zealand could be an example for all of us, but Manhattan is also there. I think there was a question of new institutions or new kinds of contract. I think Philip took up the question of a social contract. Rainer talked about international climate justice. I think from the NGO side, we need to think about the international organizations that would be necessary to deal with this broader security agenda and to come up with solutions. We know the UN is working, but the Security Council is a prohibitive instance. We have seen that the TBNW was only made through the General Assembly. So there's a need to reflect on international institutions. And finally, I would like to underline what was taken up by Bina on the question of inequalities. I think we already see that this pandemic is dealing with inequalities, geographic inequalities, poverty, but also age. And I think we have to start working more on the question of equalities and how to politically deal with this question. So I just want to end that I thank you, IPB and others who have come here, and for the Finnish Peace Union, the Suomen Rauhanliitto, as it is pronounced. I would say that we will start working. Our next 100 years will now be concerned with this broad security agenda, and I hope we can be flexible enough when new changes do emerge in the world. And I hope we can work together on this common future, our common security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarja. Excellent end to the whole session. I sent a message around, but please I think we want to take a photograph of all the participants on the one screen. So if everybody could turn their cameras on, so we can see you, that would be wonderful. And whoever's taking the picture, who is that? Is that Sean or?
Sean is doing it, but everyone has to switch on his camera now. His or her camera.
More cameras, please, switched on. Those that can. I think some people may not be able to switch their cameras on, but
doesn't matter. Some black points is good. Oh, but looks good.
If we have one more person turn their camera on, then we have a good.
Etienne, please switch on your camera.
Don't be shy.
This is new that Max Christie is shy. This is surprising.
I'm going to take 2 pictures here so I can hopefully get everyone. We have a very big group, which is great. So first picture, I'll give us a small countdown, but just be prepared. You can do a peace sign or pose however you want. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. All right, picture 1. And again, 3, 2, 1. Oh, sorry, I think I need to do just one more, sorry. All right, last countdown. 3, 2, 1. All right, now we should be good. Okay.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being so attentive, for being so thoughtful, and we are starting again at 4 o'clock finish time. So hope to see you then for a celebration of 100 years of Peace Union of Finland. Thanks ever so much. Thanks to the speakers. Thanks for the questions, the comments, and the general thoughts that you all had. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
So